guys, this is Anae from Anything for Geeks, and today, as you can probably guess from all this stuff, we're going to be talking about knights and the medieval ages. So, for an overview, we're going to be talking about knights, what they are, some specific types of knights, some facts you may not know, and very importantly, we're going to be talking about the Crusades and how that shaped knighthood and the end of the Middle Ages. And how the Middle Ages works. So let's get started. So I'm going to just remove all of this stuff. So first we're going to start with like an overview of how the Middle Ages came to be and how knights came to be. So according to this book, let's see. Somewhere right here. The Middle Ages started in 476 CE. When the Roman Empire fell to Germanic tribes called the Vandals and the Visigoths and the Huns, and they took over parts of Europe, and then one Germanic tribe came out on top after a few years of warring and trading and negotiating, and they were called the Franks, and they settled in, let's see, they settled in this yellow area, which is called the Holy Roman Empire, and their king Charlemagne first introduced the concept of knighthood. So, Charlemagne was the Holy Roman Emperor, and that's how the Middle Ages were started. And during this time, the first part of the Middle Ages is called the Dark Ages because the glory and power of Rome had faded, and there was a lot of war, there was a lot of instability, people were always getting killed, and Christianity was being oppressed by other older Germanic religions, and so that's what it's called, the Dark Ages. And in the Middle Ages, a new group of Germanic tribes from Scandinavia came up and attacked Charlemagne's Franks, which were, of course, the Vikings. And Viking attacks were incredibly disorienting and very chaotic in Western Europe. And a new system of power had to be made in order to uphold these changes and to ensure that there wouldn't be a complete state of pandemonium. And this system was called feudalism. Feudalism says basically it's basically a give and take. At the top there's king or chieftain or somebody who is the ruler, and below the ruler are his vassals, and the vassals are like lords, dukes, barons. They give money and service in return for fiefs or pieces of land over which they hold control. And vassals and kings have knights, which are very important. So knights are basically, they're soldiers, but they're not just like normal soldiers. What defines a knight is basically knights follow a chivalric code. At least most of them did. Some just broke the law. And the chivalric code distinguishes knights because it gives them a lot of restrictions, but it also gives them a lot of power. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about what the chivalric code is, but basically you were good, you were Christian, you didn't do anything bad, you protected people who couldn't protect themselves, basically you didn't kill somebody who couldn't defend themselves, such and such. And to become a knight, you had to follow all these laws, and then you had to become a squire, which was basically a servant for another knight when you were a kid. And then when you're deemed worthy enough, a lord or perhaps even the king or even your master knight would knight you, which is basically just, as you can see, I have this sword. you would get tapped on with a sword on your head or on your shoulder. That's how you got knighted. And basically, so yeah, that's how you become a knight. And what knights do is they offer military service to the king. So if there isn't a war, they just chill. They're kind of like police. They help people from bandits and other stuff. But when there's war, they are like the commanders. They're often cavalry, and yeah. So in return for that service, they get land. They get lots of money. But however, we were talking about the chivalric code earlier, and they said most knights followed the code, and in the late Middle Ages and more so into the Renaissance, or into the beginning of the Renaissance, being a knight was not usually based on how good you are, but on how much money you had and like how like actually good you were at fighting. So that's the basic overview of what a knight does and how knights came to be. And yeah, so some facts you may not know about a knight. So we always like have knights in fantasy, like stories, other like historical stories. They're part of popular culture. We had them at Renaissance fairs, and we always see them with these like swords, and like shining armor. One thing you may not know, however, about knights is that they were predominantly cavalry and they had horses. They were not foot soldiers. And in fact, they actually preferred spears rather than swords. So they would always keep a sword for hand-to-hand combat, but they would usually use spears or rather than spears, it's called a lance, which is basically a thrusting spear. So you don't throw it, you just like stab people with spears. That's what a lance is. And that was the preferred weapon of most knights, which is pretty surprising because we always associate knights with like medieval swords. So yeah, the sword was pretty much a very minor part of a knight's weaponry. Now, like there were times when they did use the sword, for example, if their horse was killed and they had to dismount, or sometimes in tournaments, which were a big thing in the Middle Ages. It's like a sports game in the modern world. There were a lot of fans, lots of cheering, lots of popular like figures, celebrities, and they were played by knights, of course. But there were a lot of tournaments, and then in that tournament, in like some of the tournaments, you had to like show your skill with a sword also. So yeah, a sword was not mostly a big part of a knight's like weaponry. Also, a thing about knights' weapons. Now that we're already talking about swords, knights wore different armor than their lesser counterparts, soldiers and bowmen. You can see that here in this helmet. This is like a solid helmet. You can like put it on, but it's solid on the top, solid on the bottom. Has like a few holes, but it's solid. It's a big plate, and that's important. Nice or plated armor, and that's what we like come to think of as armor nowadays from the Middle Ages. We just focus on knights, but only knights actually wore plated armor for the most part of the Middle Ages. Plated armor is basically you have like these big, gigantic sheets of metal. They're incredibly heavy, and you just like lock them together or like bind them together to form like these really sturdy but very heavy pieces of armor. For example, like this helmet is a toy. It weighs like a few grams, probably at most, this plastic. But a real helmet of this size, if it was plated, would weigh 85 pounds. That's the same as like a kid. So imagine like having to carry a kid on your head for like hours on end. That's not very efficient in battle. And a knight still did that. So yeah, only knights wore plated armor, and it wasn't very efficient. So now you might be asking, what did the other soldiers wear? They wore chainmail, which is like you had like these little tiny rings. So like it's like long strands of chains interlocking, and while it's kind of heavier or almost as heavy as plate mail, it's actually more efficient because it's more flexible. It's just like clothing, but it's made out of rings of steel. So that's chainmail. That's what other people wore. But knights didn't wear them because they didn't have like much need for a flexibility. They relied actually more on brute force, and they rode horses, and that means that only the horse had to be flexible. The knight just stands still. So that's like another fact about knightly armor. Also, usually knights wore tiny shields. So this is a wooden shield. This was probably worn by a foot soldier. As you can see, this has like a very simple cross on it. Oh, let's just okay. But a knight's shield, while smaller, is much more elaborate. As you can see, it's a bit more rounder. Also, note the rings and the design, and of course, the dragon embossed on this shield. Now, this shield, it could be called a buckler. Buckler shields are usually round, but this one is triangular. But this is kind of like a buckler. Bucklers are very small. They're like extremely specialized for a knight. This is for like cavalry. Because in cavalry, you just like need to block a very small point. Because like cavalry use like these spears that we mentioned earlier, lances, and you just don't like really slash with a lance, so you don't need like a lot of area. You just need like a really powerful shield. So yeah, this is a buckler. This is like a common medieval shield. And knights often had like these designs. For example, this dragon on this shield. But if this toy actually belonged to a knight, that dragon would be on the symbol of everybody in his family. So this is, I think it's called like a standard. So the dragon standard, it would be embossed on his shield. And say this helmet belonged to the owner of this shield. It would also go, so you can notice, if you look really closely, you can notice like there's a little tiny like circle at the very center or top of the helmet, and you could like fix a standard there, so that you could like put an actual dragon on there, like not an actual, but a metal dragon on there, and that would go along with the shield. And if you didn't have matching armor, then people would know that you were actually a fake. So right now I'm a fake because I don't have a standard to go along with my shield, which is sad. So yeah, that's knightly armor and weapons and stuff. Let's talk about the Crusades really quickly. So let's see, the Crusades were like an important series of wars in the Middle Ages. They're called that because the Crusades, Crusaders, which were people who fought in the Crusades, wore these white like shirts over their armor with red crosses on there. So like the Crusades literally mean the Wars of the Cross. And yeah, these were religious wars, so I hope I do not offend anybody who may or may not have religious beliefs here. But what happened is, in areas that all the three religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, deem holy lands, which is basically the Levant, and most importantly, the city of Jerusalem, was overtaken by the Turks or the Saracens, as the medieval Europeans like to call them. And they were Islam, and they were like they wanted like huge taxes if anybody who was not Muslim had to enter into the Holy Lands. And the Jews actually lived there, so they didn't have like a lot of choice. and the Christians could not visit Jerusalem either, and people did not like that. So the Europeans waged war against the Turks. So this was not as much religious as like usual books like to tell you. It's more than just money, because the Turks had lots of wealth. They're incredibly wealthy, as you can imagine, from getting huge taxes from people always coming in to their territory. So they're immensely wealthy. And the Western Europeans, such as like the Holy Romans, the French, the English, they were fighting on the behalf of the Byzantine Empire, which was in Greece, and those were the remnants of Eastern Rome. And Rome had been also incredibly wealthy, so the Western Europeans were hoping to extract a lot of wealth from the Crusades. So yeah, that's why the Crusades happened. The Crusades led to the Renaissance as well, because Western and Eastern contact increased. New ideas were like flowing in, like both cultural and like in weapons, all sorts of stuff. And yeah, knights were an important part of the crusade. Like most actually effective crusades had knights as their main like portion of their army. And some crusades were incredibly sad and really ineffective. So ineffective that you would never believe that people actually thought that it would work. For example, I think this was like Third Crusade. Let me check. It's one of the crusades. So let's see. In this book, let's see. Yeah, the Crusades. Yeah, so the Crusades weakened feudalism as well. So it says here, quote, the Crusades also weakened the power of nobles and feudalism. Many nobles went off to fight in the Crusades and maybe didn't come back, and gave their land to the king, which meant the feudal system is basically like this. You give something to the people who are above you, they gave you something. Most likely like land and food stuff. Yeah, always land. And if serfs, which are basically slaves and farmers, gave food and service to knights and vassals, they would get military service and land and oil, and like they didn't get money. So, but the knights had to give a military service to the vassals and to the king, in which they would get land. The vassals had to give money and loyalty to the king, in which the king would give them land. So basically what's happening is all these vassals and all these knights and some of the serfs are fighting in the Crusades, and they are all giving their land to the king. They don't have land, so yeah, if they don't have something, they don't have to give something. So basically that weakens feudalism. And let's see, the Crusades. Not here. Let's see. No, there's nothing about the Crusades in this book. Anyway, one of the Crusades was basically just a movement of all the serfs that you could think of. They were just like literally walking across Europe and into Asia to fight, and they were massacred, every single one of them, and that was very unfortunate, and also very ineffective. So yeah, that's when the Crusades. Other Crusades were incredibly effective. Like I think the Third Crusade, which was led by the French and the English and some other countries' kings, and that was incredibly effective as the Europeans actually managed to gain the Holy Land back, but they didn't get a lot of money from it because they lost a lot of people, and also the Turks had much more territory remaining. So you would think mission accomplished. You have the Holy Land, now all that just remains is to defend it, right? No. Once you go to war, you stay on the war till like your enemy is completely wiped out. So that's what they did, and nothing happened for a long time. And in 1244, the Crusades ended, and the Byzantine Empire fell. Its capital, Constantinople, was also taken over by the Turks, who by this time had also reclaimed the Holy Land. And they renamed Constantinople Istanbul, and it's today the capital of Turkey. And basically, you could say that the Crusades were just a massive waste of resources and people's and lives, but it had some good stuff that came with it. So, like the intermixing of art, like for example the Oriental rug, like Islam was beginning to take hold in the Byzantine Empire, and today, even in Eastern Europe today, there are a lot of Muslims due to the Crusades, and like a lot of ideas went forth, and this is why the Renaissance happened. Like people were introduced to Asian spices, and people wanted more spices, so the age of exploration happened, and people started to colonize Asia. All this was due to a not so immense failure that we call the Crusades. But other bad things also came along with it, such as the Black Plague, which was also due to like trading, so both directly and indirectly. When there was more like Asian contact, people started trading more with the East, and Eastern diseases started creeping into Europe, and that's how the Black Plague was like so important. So yeah, that's basically it for today. I'll see you next time. Stay tuned. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, all that good stuff. Stay tuned. Bye.